Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of LinkedIn Office Hours. I am your host, Robbie Kelman-Baxter. This series features some of my favorite fellow LinkedIn learning instructors going beyond the courses to talk about the skills that are required to thrive in today's sometimes chaotic professional environment. Please say hi in the chat. Let us know where you're listening from today. And if you have any questions, I'm here in Menlo Park, California, where I actually just got my power back a few hours ago. I wasn't sure we were going to be able to do this live, but very grateful to Pacific Gas and Electric for getting us up and running after 3 days in the dark. Don't know if anybody else is calling in from that part of the country or dealing with that kind of craziness. But that's the experience that I had this past couple of days. Today, let's turn to what we're going to be talking about today. Today, we're going to be challenging one of the most challenging areas for professional independent consultants, which is pricing. Every client engagement is unique and requires some amount of labor on your side, delivers some amount of value to your client. And it can feel like it's almost impossible to price fairly and appropriately for every customer situation, and to do it in a way that is clear and easy for your clients to understand. Not easy. Let me welcome today my guest, Mike Figlioulo, the founder and managing director of Thought Leaders, LLC. He's an author with specialties in the fields of strategy, leadership, communications, decision-making, problem-solving, training, organizational development, consumer goods, service operations, a whole litany of things. And what he is really phenomenal at is taking the complex and making it simple. We're going to be taking lessons from Mike's Consulting Foundations course and also from my Concept of Value for Consultants course. These are two LinkedIn learning courses that we're going to make free for you today. So feel free to check them out. I'm going to ask our assistant Nat to put those in the comments area so you can check them out. And then without further ado, let me invite Mike to the stream. Welcome, Mike.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me on. I'm so happy that we're making this happen and you do have power back.
I know it's crazy. It's the little things, right? It's lights and heat and Wi-Fi.
Exactly.
Yeah. So let's just jump in. Why do you think that figuring out pricing is so hard for so many consultants?
Pricing is the most important lever that you have in running your business profitably, period. And I think part of the thing that most consultants struggle with is they have a hard time separating themselves from what they're asking for. And when you look at what you get paid when you're in the corporate world, a lot of people will just take that rate and come up with an hourly rate. But what they don't realize is the rate has to be much higher to account for things that you're not getting paid for, like vacation and business development, et cetera. So I think it's just really hard to separate yourself from the price and therefore put something out there that's going to be advantageous to you.
Yeah, it's hard. And you bring up an important point is that you have to, when you leave the corporate world and you hang out your shingle, as it were, it's hard to kind of figure out all the things that you've given up that you need to take into account, and also to think about how to convey that in a clear way. Are there any guidelines? I've seen, one of the rules that somebody presented to me when I was very early, just starting out in consulting, is take your annual salary, and what was it? It was take your annual salary, make that into an hourly rate, and then double it. Right. So if you make $100,000 a year, that's about $100 an hour. That was one.
I'll offer a slightly different formula, and it's going to end up with a higher number. So take your total cash compensation, and that includes base, bonus, incentive options that you might get, your entire compensation, divide by 250, because that's the number of billable days in a year, divide by 8 hours in a day, and then triple it. And that's your starting hourly rate. And that's if you're conducting business on an hourly basis. I actually don't like the hourly model just because you're rate limited and there's only so many hours in a day that you can bill for, and that's it. To your points of pricing for value, it's much more about understanding the value that you're going to deliver to that client and making sure you're getting an appropriate piece of that value.
Yeah, great point. So, as I mentioned, that advice on how to come up with a starting point for pricing was the first piece of advice I got on pricing when I started out, which was, basically, I think useful if you're going to be a contractor. Useful, and we can get into that kind of the distinction between pricing like a contractor, which is, I think about it as filling in for a body that's missing, right?
Yeah.
Looking like you're part of the company, part of the organization, versus being a consultant where you're being compensated for the value you deliver. You're not part of the company. You're an outsider, providing expert guidance in, functional expertise or some area of content expertise. But I think you're absolutely right that you do want to price for value rather than pricing for labor,
Yep.
which is but pricing for labor I think is a bare minimum.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So you brought up this thing about pricing for value. How do you know how much value you're providing and what that value is worth?
Sure. There are a lot of good starting points. So you can look at benchmarks if you have a service or a product that you're offering, look at what's already in the marketplace to at least get a starting point. So, for example, I run a training firm and we go out and we look at training that is of equivalent duration and equivalent quality. And we look at what other training firms charge for that training. And we say, okay, we're going to be in that range, but also recognize we're going to take a premium position. So we'll be at the higher end of that range. So benchmarking is one approach. A second approach is looking at the value that the client is going to derive. So for example, if you're doing procurement engagements and you're a procurement consultant and you're going to save the client $5 million a year over the course of your engagement, looking at that and saying, okay, of that $5 million, I want X percent of it, and that equates to Y dollars that I'll get, and you get the rest of the benefit as a client. So those are the two primary approaches that I'd use to at least figure out an initial starting point. And then you have to layer on it, what is your market strategy? What types of clients are you serving? And then adjust up and down from there.
Yeah, I like that. So the two that you brought up is what is the value that you expect that your client is going to derive from your work? How is their condition going to be improved as a result of your expertise and insight and help? And the other one is what are their other options? So, where do you want to fit into that? So, for example, if if I help you find the employee that you need to run your company, if I help you, if I'm a CEO recruiter, the value is infinite, right? Because without a leader, how are you going to move forward? But on the other hand, there are lots of other recruiters who can also do this, maybe not as well as me, but I do need to keep that in mind. A third thing that I might include, and I'm interested in what you think in triangulating this, is what is the cost to you? So you as the consultant. So what are your opportunity costs?
Sure.
What is it going to take out of you? So for example, back to this recruiting example, if somebody asked me to go find them a CEO, that's not what I do, right? I'm a subscription and membership model expert. That's what I focus on. I could probably find you maybe a CEO in that space, but if you asked for a CEO at a procurement business or a construction business, I would have no idea where to start. And I would have to spend a lot of hours to do it. But they probably aren't going to pay me more than they would pay a professional recruiter. And they might even pay me less because it takes me longer. So in that case, it's my own opportunity cost that would prevent me from taking on that work. And I only bring this up as a third part of our pricing triangle, because I see a lot of people being asked to do something where the market just isn't willing to pay as much as the person feels that their time is worth.
Right.
And they're like, but somebody else paid me triple that. And it's like, well, yeah, but there's either not as much value here, or there are other people who can do it better or faster or more efficiently than you. I think you do need to keep that in mind as well. Do you agree? Have you experienced that as well?
Yeah, I mean, you have to understand the value of your time and what you're going to spend that time on. For me, it's whether you walk away from a piece of work or not is really driven by two things. One is strategy and saying, this is what I do, this is what I'm great at, this is what my firm or my organization stands for. And if you're outside of that box, I'm not doing it. Right.
Okay.
I don't care how much you want to pay me, because you end up in a really bad spot where you start taking on things just because you're making a little bit more money here and there. And all of a sudden you don't stand for anything in the market. So that can be challenging. So that's sort of my first screen is it even in the box that we play in? And then second is being able to and willing to walk away from that work. So for me, I tend not to think necessarily in terms of the cost, but I guess it's absolutely implied in what we do when we get pushed on price and a client says, hey, we know you're normally at this rate, we want it at this rate. And if I can sort of bridge to that and say there's probably an ongoing relationship here, yeah, I may take a little bit less and bet on the volume. But I'm also looking at that break point of, when are you going to be a pain for me to serve and I'm not making enough, and there's other clients out there who are willing to pay it, or even if I don't have them yet, but I know I can find them. And for me,
Yeah.
that's that break point.
Yeah, really, I think you bring up some really important points. First of all, I totally agree with you that a lot of, this, what is it going to cost me? That third part of this triangle that I think is important. A lot of that you can figure that out quickly by knowing what your strategy is. And a lot of people who are just getting into consulting have a really hard time with going narrow. Sometimes I hear people say there's riches in the niches. People will say, well, I can do it, so should I do it? And you're saying, like, just because I can do it, doesn't mean that I should do it, that it's good for my business, that it's good for my own mental health, and I can walk away from it. I don't have to take every piece of business that's offered. I thought that was a really important point to make. Knowing your strategy, being focused. An example of this is, let's say that you're working in product management now, and you leave your job. You might say, I do product management, all things product management. I also worked in a financial services firm, so I do all things financial services. I'm an expert on both. That's a very, very big area. But if you say, I'm really good at I know everything there is to know about micropayments, and optimizing on micropayments for news media, right?
Yep.
Suddenly people can remember what you do. But it's scary. It's scary to go narrow. Also, you and I are both quite active building our brands on platforms like LinkedIn, and the more general you are on LinkedIn, the less likely it is that the people who follow you are going to be the people that you really want to reach, the ones who are actually going to have engagements that are the kind of work that you're focused on doing for your firm.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I've been running my business for 18 years. We have 27 training courses. That's it. 27. That's it. But in those training courses, we will go toe to toe with any other training firm out there and compete for the biggest clients on the planet for the biggest pieces of business. And we will win the vast majority of the time, because we have such extreme focus on those topics, and we have gotten so good at delivering them and then being able to translate that to what our clients need, that the table is tilted in our direction, but it's been a function of that extreme focus. And it is hard. I have an inquiry in my inbox right now, and it's, hey, we want a course and it's generally based on this topic. It's like, yeah, I could do that. Or I can go and serve, this other client and try and make 3 or 4 sales calls to them. And again, that opportunity cost comes in. But yeah, go
Yeah.
narrow, know what you stand for, and be great at it.
Yeah. Yeah. I started very broad and quickly, when I started consulting, this is, 20 something years ago now, I needed to pay my mortgage. I'd gotten
Sure.
laid off while I was on maternity leave. And my first thought was, I'm going to do whatever I can do that is legal, and that will cover my mortgage. But I think within a few months, I talked to enough other consultants that I learned that, hourly pricing to be arms and legs. is not the best way to go in consulting. There's no shame in being a contractor, but that is not consulting.
Right.
And if you want to consult, you need to have an area of expertise that you can credibly own. And like you said, if it's a specific number of courses where you know it better than anybody else, that's amazing. You know what your lane is. And it also makes it easier to say no. You don't have to feel bad about, well, I could create that course. I know about 80% of it. I'd probably have to do 20% of it new. And who would I get to help me, write that up? And you're like, nope, that's not what I do. And you can even say, hey, I don't do that, which is actually a credibility enhancer, I think, for that client. Because they're like, Mike didn't try to pull wool over my eyes and tell me he knew he had a course for that. He said, no, I don't do that. Go talk to, my friend so-and-so. When I have a course that he says he knows what he's doing, I can have a high level of confidence that, it's going to be, the best available.
Yeah. Well, the other thing it does is it enables you to be much stronger in your pricing position. We have one course where I have had former, I was at McKinsey for a while, and I've had former McKinsey folks come to me, and they're in corporate now, and they find out we have this course, and I've been told, oh my gosh, I've been looking for this course for 10 years. And you are
what's the course? What's the course?
We call it
big firm consultant.
Yeah, we call it structured thought and communication, which is basically McKinsey style communication and analysis and stakeholder management. And when a client says to you, I've been looking for this course for 10 years, you have the Holy Grail. Well, guess what? I'm not really flexible on pricing when you just found the Holy Grail. And they're not really worried about pricing at that point, right? Because they have found that one thing they have been searching for. So knowing what you're great at and owning that space. And I'm not saying, oh, we have no competition, but we have very few. And that pricing conversation is very different than when they, go on to Google and they start putting in a search and they get 100,000 search results. You have no pricing power in that situation.
Yeah. If you're just joining us, I'm with Mike Figlioulo. We're talking about pricing for consultants. We've put the courses. Both of us are LinkedIn Learning instructors. We've posted our courses. They're free for you for this week, I believe. So feel free to check them out. We have people joining us from all over the world. We got Rishi in London, Paul in Chicago, my friend Eric, who's also in Menlo Park, where we just got our power back. We've got people from Tennessee, New York, Boulder, Morocco. So welcome, everyone. Please feel free to put your questions and comments into the chat. I think that this is a good one to put up here. This is from Rishi. Can you ever measure value? Is it I don't think you can ever measure value. It's qualitative. It doesn't make sense in computing pricing, which is quantified. I'd love to get your thoughts on that, Mike.
Yeah.
Can you measure value? How do you?
I disagree.
I thought you might. Yep.
Depending on the type of work, sometimes it's very easy to measure value. Like the procurement example I offered, if a client is spending $100 million a year on a certain commodity and you go in, you do some procurement work, and the next year they spend $95 million using your new approach, well, there's $5 million and I can measure that. Other things are a little harder to quantify. Look, I sell invisible stuff, right? That's what I sell. I show up, I talk, your people are smarter, and they walk away and they're, going to be better at their jobs. So there are approaches, though, to start getting to some quantification. And what I ask for one of our courses is, how much time do you think you can save per month using these methods in terms of doing less junk analysis, having fewer meetings? Who thinks they can save 1 hour per month? And all the hands in the room go up. Great. Then the payback period on this course is 3 months, because I know what you make. I don't really know their salaries, but I know generally what a professional at their level makes. And I know that 3 hours of savings, it equals the cost of the course, right? So there are ways to get to estimates. Now, am I able to measure it? I could, if I wanted to go do a big longitudinal study, I could measure value. I don't want to, but I have to get a reasonably close enough estimate that a client looks at and says, I believe that number. I believe the work you're going to do is going to drive at least that much impact. Therefore, there's value.
Yeah. That makes total sense. I see our friend Angela Wick, another LinkedIn learning instructor who's down in Santa Barbara right now, where it's chilly and spotty internet, but she's able to join us. She says value is what someone is willing to pay to solve the problem. What are your thoughts on that as a definition? I kind of like it.
So for me, I try to really keep value to a benefit perspective. And yes, Angela, I totally agree that those are connected, but there's an intervening step of value is the benefit I derive, and the benefit I derive will dictate what I'm willing to pay to solve the problem. So I would just really want to make that middle step explicit, because when you're communicating with a client, that conversation needs to come up of, here is the benefit you're going to get from working with me. Do you believe this benefit? Yes. Okay. Are you willing to pay this much to get that benefit? Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So she also added, and what is solving the problem mean, which I think is exactly what you were just talking about, and putting that into a benefit statement.
Yes.
I think what's interesting about what you said is that even if something feels like it can't be quantified, there's often ways to do it. And you can, one of the things that I sometimes do is try to break down the different types of value, the different value buckets, to explore with a prospective client, to make sure that they're going to, the truth is, I don't want to work with somebody if they're not going to get so much value from working with me that the price is, as you said, is sort of irrelevant.
Yeah.
So it is, it's worth it for both of us to dig in a little bit and to look at, start first with the hard numbers. Are we going to save money, right? If you work with me, you'll purchase more effectively, or you'll spend less. Those things are easy to measure. Then you say, like you were saying, employee time, right? Employee time has a value ascribed to it, right? If the employee makes $50 an hour and I save them an hour, I've saved you $50. If I do that for 1,000 employees, that's $50,000.
Right.
If my math is right, that's easy too. Then the softer ones, I think, are sometimes, and I think Rishi was talking about that. Sometimes softer benefits are harder to quantify, but it's still there. What's it worth to you to not have your employees banging on your door asking the same questions over and over again, right? Well, there's my actual time that saves me an hour a day. There's also peace of mind. Like, I hate that. It feels, it's frustrating. It's not what I'm here to do. It's not the best use of my time. I would pay out of my own pocket X to not have to deal with that.
Yeah.
So I think all of that is really, really useful ways to get at a number. But I've also found, and this is something that I think a lot of consultants struggle with, it's very rare that there's only one number, that you're like, okay, that, now that I've talked to you, prospective client, for an hour or 3 hours, this project is worth $42,358, period, right? There's usually a range. And I think with your courses, you've made some decisions about what you think is a fair value point, pricing on the high end of what else is out there, recognizing the value that you create for most of your clients, and you keep your pricing pretty firm there. I think some people that are probably watching don't have such a clear, because they're not teaching courses, they might have a more bespoke pricing structure. But I think the important thing for people to remember is that there isn't a perfect price. This is not a perfectly efficient market. And in fact, it's like one of the hardest things I think about consulting is that people are all over the map.
Well, and it's one of those things. Yes, we do training, but we also do consulting projects as well. And it's a question of making sure you're going to generate enough value for them that they're not questioning it on the back end. So, Rishi, I saw your point around, yeah, but what if other people are doing work on that $5 million of savings, and what are you getting? Okay, great. Then let's make an estimate and say, of all the work that's being done in this area, this project, we're going to fundamentally change your processes and do new contracting for you and build you some new models. And we reasonably believe that, knowing the other projects that are going on, we're going to deliver half of the value. So are you willing to say that 2.5 million of that is attributable to us? Yes. Okay, then we'll charge you $200,000 and we're good. And you got a 10x return on your money. That's it, right? If we're getting into measuring stuff, you're in a really bad place. You're in a really bad place. And I saw somebody mention before we really started up around doing contingent work. I hate contingent work. I have called my attorneys in to deal with a client situation once in 18 years. And it was because of some contingent work. And we had a disagreement on what the outcome parameters were, and they were really, really clear. So it's
Yeah.
one of those things where you want to be so far, as Robbie brought up, you want to be so far ahead in terms of the value you're generating that they don't even look at the fees. They don't even question it. You have to have a model that will do that.
Yeah. I popped up Neil's comment that you referenced. Bad to leave money on the table, but just as bad to lose a consulting gig because of fees. I'm not sure. I think it's okay sometimes to lose a consulting gig because of fees. And do you ever do it on a contingency basis? I do know that there are some businesses that work on a contingency basis. A lot of
Sure.
deal-oriented consultants, bankers. If I
Sure.
make the deal, I get a cut of the deal. Recruiters, who we mentioned earlier, there's a whole class of recruiters where the norm is, if I bring you the employee
Yeah.
that you keep, I get a third of their salary for the first year. It's a really big number. I think that that's okay in certain places, but I think what you're saying, Mike, and what I think is really important is know your value, and don't let some kind of arbitrary definition determine whether or not you're going to get paid. I think
Exactly.
that's really, really important. I see a question down here. There's so much going on the chat, which is amazing. Asking about retainers.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on retainer
So retainer can be
versus
great,
pure
and I do
project? Here it is.
some executive coaching where we're on a retainer, and part of that retainer, what you got to be comfortable with is helping them really understand what is or is not included in that retainer. So, for example, when I'm doing executive coaching, I tell my client, hey, it's going to be at least X number of hours on the phone or in person, plus you'll have access to these resources, plus you'll get this, plus you'll get sort of unlimited email and phone support if you need it. But also letting them know, hey, there's a line, right? If you're calling me every 15 minutes, we need to talk about this. And most of my clients are pretty senior executives. They get the deal. So you've got to let them know what's in the project or what's in the retainer. And I kind of argue that per project and monthly retainer can be kind of similar, because where you really get into a challenge is scope. Scope creep is what happens when you price on a per project basis or even on a retainer basis. So clients will always try to get more out of you than they're paying for, right? I mean, if they're not really good clients, and they will want to expand the scope. And can't you just do this? And can't you just do that? And can't we just add this? And well, that should be in the retainer, or that should be in the project scope. So the most critical thing is really getting the scoping right and pricing for it, but also having that clarity with the client. This is in and this is out of scope. And this is what successful delivery looks like. Here are the deliverables I'm going to give you at the end of this. Once I give them to you, we are done and the project is paid for. You have to have those success criteria black and white, or you're going to be spending extra time at the end of the project giving more hours and not getting additional fees.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think there's so much to unpack in what you just said. Project based. The thing that's hard about project based is you really need to scope it well. You need to be really clear on what you're doing. If you have deliverables, or if you have outcomes, right? If you say the outcome is, you're going to see, a decline in attrition, or you're going to see an increase in revenue per customer, or something like that. Or if you say, I'm going to give you a report, and that is the output, which I know some consultants do, or I'm going to do market research for you and you're going to get a recommendation. That's, often that's what consultants provide. I'm going to give you a recommendation. And when I give you the recommendation, I'm done. And if you want to go to phase 2 of the project, which is I'm going to support you on your implementation, that's where that nice delineation is. It is important, I think, to have those delineations. I think even more important than protecting than worrying about scope creep. I think I don't think, at least in my experience, I have not found that scope creep is usually caused by somebody trying to push the envelope and get more out of me, so much as they don't really remember what the terms were, or they think of it as being sort of connected. And what I found is I say, this is a little bit beyond what I usually say is this is a little bit beyond the scope of what we'd agreed to. but I'm willing to, have a conversation with you about it because you're a good client or what have you, if the project is big enough. And the nice thing I think about project-based consulting, or, when you're doing sort of a big strategy project, is there's so much room in there, because what they're really paying for, as you pointed out early on in our conversation, is the massive value that you provide, your expertise, your experience, your knowledge. It might not take you a lot of time to deliver on it because you have pattern recognition. You've done this a lot of times before.
Sure.
This, I think, is in the pure consulting realm, as opposed to, if you're running training or you're running a research
Yeah.
project. But there is room there. But this is also why so many people, I just want to say something about, contract work, which is, I think about a lot of people who say they're consultants, to me are contractors, meaning they're, you can be an interim CFO, very senior role, working on an hourly basis and pretending like you're the CFO, acting as the CFO. Great work, very noble work, not consulting. You're not consulting. You're just popping in and doing a job for somebody. Some people love doing that and do that for their
Sure.
whole careers because
Absolutely.
it's easier. You just walk in, you say, this is my hourly rate. This is how many hours I think we're going to need. If we need more hours, either I'll do them or I won't do them, or I'll do them at a higher price or I'll do them at a lower price. But whereas if I'd always do project-based, that puts a little bit more risk on my side because I have to deliver the outcome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um,
And getting to the point of outcomes, I want things that I can control, right? So I would get hesitant to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to deliver an incremental X dollars in revenue per customer, because I can control that up to a certain point if you implement my recommendations. But if your marketing department decides to go nuts with coupons that month and then changes your pricing schedule, all of a sudden pricing per customer goes down, and I'm hosed, even though it had nothing to do with the outcome that I was delivering to you. So I
right.
want my work to be as closely tied as possible to that outcome. So I will give you a report, or I will, I will get somebody hired, or right. But I don't want other external factors impacting my compensation when I can't
Right.
control them.
Right. I hear you. Okay. We are just over the time. We said it was going to be 30 minutes. We're at 32 after. Do you have time for one or two more questions, Mike?
Sure,
And
absolutely.
and folks, if you have to go, if you have a meeting at the bottom of the hour, please feel free. But if you can stay a few more minutes, we got a couple more gems, and I got Mike for another 5 or 10 minutes. So stick around. So this is a question from Eric Burmeister. How selective can or should early state consultants be? Isn't there value to casting a wider net earlier in order to get a history of effective service delivery on which you can build greater selectivity? Great question.
Yeah, I think first of all, before you go off on being a consultant, if you haven't gone into that space, and let's say you're still working in corporate, you better have a year of cash on hand, a year, and expect to bill nothing in that year, because otherwise you're going to feel that pressure and you're going to start discounting. You're going to start taking on work you shouldn't. Make sure you have a sufficient cushion before you go and make that jump. Second is, yeah, you want that first logo on your website. You do, right? Because then there's some proof of market that somebody is actually using Mike here. Maybe we should actually investigate them. By the time you get the second logo, especially if they're in different industries, or they're other brand recognized names, the need to go broader and add more logos goes down sort of exponentially, right? It's not a linear curve. And by the time you got a third logo, you need to zoom in and focus on those folks that you really think you can deliver the value there.
Yeah, right on. I totally agree with what you said. The one thing that I would add, just from kind of experiences that I've seen with people that I've coached on consulting, is sometimes you don't have a year's salary. Like, that is great,
Sure,
and that is,
absolutely.
yeah.
That's
And
ideal.
if you don't, I mean, this is the part that I think is really important, is that if you don't have a year's expenses set aside, sometimes, like I said, when I started, I just took hourly work. Like, I was pretty much a contractor. I was like, I was a product manager. And I remember my very first consulting engagement was doing PowerPoint decks, right? I'd been a big company strategy consultant. I'd run a product team. Somebody said, I can pay you to put together a deck for our board. Can you put together the deck and talk out? And I was like, yeah, I can do that. You'll pay me?
Sure.
Sure. And only slowly. The other thing that I'll just share, in the spirit of candor and trying to help people as much as possible, is that I didn't know what my specialty was yet. I knew what a lot of things that I could do, but I didn't really know where is that sweet spot of my expertise, and what the market needs. And it took me a couple of years. So my fifth client was Netflix. And starting with my first client, I was like, I need to have a specialty, like all the stuff you're saying. I need to have a specialty. I need to be more of a consultant. I need to be selling my expertise, not my hours, my brain, not my arms and legs. But I didn't know how to describe that in a way that was compelling. And I experimented. And then when I started working with Netflix, I got this idea that, nobody else is talking about subscriptions. Nobody else is talking, when people talk about membership, they're talking about associations. They're not talking about what I'm thinking about. Maybe this is an area. And I'm a very risk averse person. So I dipped my toe into that positioning, continued taking on other kinds of work for another year or two before I said, all I do is, subscription pricing and membership models. But I think it is possible to go slow especially if you don't have that, that luxury. Yeah.
Yeah. And look, when I left corporate and I went full time with my training business, I had been starting it part time while I was still employed and would take a day of vacation and go teach and then go back to work. I took a part time consulting gig, but it was 70% of my time. And it was for purely that reason, to be generating cash while I was standing up the business. The one thing I made clear, though, was this consulting work is not related to my business. This is contract work. This is a paper route. Granted, a very nicely paying paper route, but it was purely for cash. And I did not confuse that with my core business that I was trying to build. And if you can keep them separate, then I think it's totally appropriate. And I do see the one question around timelines for payment. For me, it's at the end. We're professionals. I'm going to send you an invoice at the end. I try to minimize administrivia and any complexity in my business. I want to send you one invoice. We're done. That's it. And I'll send it to you at the end. If it's granted, if you're worried about the client paying you, or maybe it's your first time working with them, great. Maybe you get a partial retainer up front. But after a while, it's just admin, and admin takes time. And why am I going to spend my time on that when it should be billable hours?
Yeah. No, it's interesting. It's funny. I also do, try to do just one payment, but I do it at the beginning if I can. There are some times where they want to wait. What I've found, and I'm just sharing, so people have different, hear different experiences, is that at the end, I feel like I have a lot less leverage. If my client, like I just had a client who left the company right at the end of the project. So project's supposed to end last week of February. It was a 14-month project. He left the company pretty suddenly. If I was waiting on that, I would have to. So it is, if you, like, I think you're right. If you have a good relationship with that client, absolutely, you can wait till the end. In my experience, I've tried, in fact, I even often, not always, but often, especially on a big project, I'll offer a discount for payment up front. And, hashtag pro tip, a lot of organizations require their teams to take the discount for early payment. So it kind of works for everybody. You get paid early.
Yeah.
They look like heroes. Because it can be. I mean, I've had one or two times where I've had trouble getting paid back, and with hundreds of clients over a 20 plus year career, that seems like not so bad, but it is painful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And look, if you're doing 6-month, 10-month, 12-month projects, I am not saying wait until the end of 12 months to get paid, right? So that's a situation where there are maybe milestone payments for phases of the project, and once a phase is done, then they get paid and the next phase begins. Or if it's going to be a long project, there are going to be interim bills along the way, right? So just to clarify that, if it's something short and it's like 2 to 3 months, it's like, you know what, I don't want to deal with the admin. Great, when we're done, I'm going to invoice you, right?
Yeah. Especially if as you said, if you know them, if you've worked with them before, and we haven't even really talked about that. You said something at the very beginning about sometimes you might take a smaller work with the client if they say, this is how big our budget is, this is how big our suitcase of money is, we don't have as much as you're asking for. Sometimes you'll get creative with them if you see possibility for a longer term relationship.
Sure. Absolutely.
Which I
Well,
think,
and the times that I won't are the times where it's oh, we're going to work with you so much, and therefore you should give us a discount on this first project. And I say, great. So that's going in the contract. And they're like, what? I was like,
right,
well,
exactly.
that you're going to give me all this work for a discount. So if I'm putting the discount in the contract, you're putting the work in the contract. And all of a sudden they're like, well, maybe, okay, then the discount doesn't go in. And I have had it where they're like, great, let's put the discount in and we'll commit to this amount of work. And if we don't deliver that amount of work, then there's a clawback that you get. Okay, awesome. But put it in the contract.
Yeah. People are always promising stuff that they won't put in writing. Give me, put the lower price in writing and I'll verbally let you know that maybe there's a lot of work down there. And it's like, no. Or the one, I don't know if you do a lot of speaking, but last, I would say since my first book came out in 2015, I sort of became an accidental speaker, and I do a lot of keynote speaking now. And people often will call all the time and ask me to speak for free, telling me that I'll get a lot of business from it. And I'm like, great, pay me. And then when I get the business, I'll give you back your money.
How
about that?
Look, exposure is the worst currency in the world. Oh, we'll give you exposure. And, I'm fortunate that at this point in my career, I'm like, you mean I'll give you exposure, right? And it's like, guys, it doesn't work like this. There is payment that comes along with it. And that's where you got to be willing to walk away.
Yeah. I think that's a great place for us to end, is the willingness to walk away and the pride in your work. One of the hardest things about, at least for me, of being a consultant is that I've always been in marketing, but now I'm in sales too. And I'm selling myself. And sometimes when somebody says you're not worth that much, right, which is basically what they say, you say, I'm going to charge you this much. And like you said, you're not selling anything. You're just selling your own wisdom. And if they say, I'd like to pay you less for your wisdom, it's hard to say my wisdom's valuable, and to walk away. But it is. As my mentor, Alan Weiss, says all the time, the first sale is to yourself. If you don't believe that you're providing that level of value, you're never going to be able to close business with other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not getting emotional in that moment, because I used to get emotional and they'd say, well, it's not worth that. And I heard it as, you're not worth that. And now, okay, it's on. And it's separating it out and saying, no, they're just saying that service, I don't see the value in that service and I want to pay less for it. And because if you're emotional in a negotiation, you already lost. That's it. Right. And being able to separate yourself from the work is a challenge that a lot of consultants face.
Yeah, absolutely. Great words to end on. Thank you so much, Mike, for being my guest on this live. Folks, you can get access to the recording. If you missed the beginning, the recording will be available on both of our streams. And you can be notified of future events by following us on LinkedIn. And next week I will be back with another episode of LinkedIn live stream, LinkedIn Office Hours with Rick Adams, and we're going to be talking about customer success. So I hope you join us. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you soon.